Hello everyone, welcome to chapter 7 of the CIA video series for this book. In this particular video, we're going to be taking a look at password mining on Windows systems. Now again, we cover quite a few techniques in the book, both manual and automated. And I'm going to be taking you through the process of finding application passwords. And finally, we'll then move on to taking a look at how to dump Windows hashes and how to use those hashes to elevate your privileges on the target system. So yeah, we'll talk about dumping Windows hashes with multiple tools, both manually and automatically, how to crack them and how to use the hashes for authentication, and also how to initiate a connection to the target with the credentials that you've been able to gather or that you've been able to crack from the hashes. That being said, let's get started with the first process, which again will involve identifying application passwords. Now, we've already explained within the book how to search for passwords in configuration files. But for the purpose of this video and with the virtual machine, that's the virtual machines that we have, it'll make much more sense to actually go through the process from the perspective of searching for application passwords and then of course dumping Windows hashes. So in this video, we are going to be using the Metasploitable 3 virtual machine as it is configured to be a server, and of course, as we know, it's based on Windows Server 2008 and will provide us with excellent examples as to how some of these techniques can be applied in the field. So when it comes down to searching for application passwords, this will of course involve an analysis of what services and software or programs are running on the target. So in our particular case, we were able to identify that the Metasploitable 3 virtual machine has a MySQL server running. It also has phpMyAdmin and a WordPress installation on it. So from that knowledge or that understanding, we can start staging our next attacks. And of course, given the fact that we have a LAMP stack or a WAMP stack set up for web hosting, we can try first of all to identify the MySQL server credentials so that we can gain access to the MySQL server. So if I just spawn into a shell session here and I head over into the C drive, the root of the C drive, and I list out the files here, you can see that we have the WAMP folder here, which again is used to store all the web applications being hosted. So if we change our directory into there and we list out the various directories and files within this particular folder, you can see we have quite a few things, but the web applications are stored in the www directory over here. So again, if we change our directory into that particular directory or folder, and then we list the contents there, you can see that we have an index.php file, we have a few other files here, but we don't get an entire listing. So if we just terminate back into our Meterpreter session and we list the contents here, I'm just going to head over into the C drive again, and we go back into the WAMP and www folder, like so. So WAMP and www, and we list out the contents there. You can see now we also have a WordPress directory, which is not displayed for some reason within the command prompt, but we are able to identify it. Now, WordPress is a content management system that, of course, utilizes the MySQL server to store relevant data. And within a WordPress installation, the WordPress config file actually stores the MySQL credentials. So if we are able to access that particular file, we should be able to get credentials that we can use to access the MySQL server. So in order to do that, we're just going to change our directory into the WordPress directory here. And if we list out all the files, you can see we have the WordPress config.php file. Now, if we can actually cat out the content, or actually display the content here by simply typing in type wp config and typing in the extension. Of course, we need to get into a shell session for that, and we say type again WordPress config.php, and that'll actually cat out the content for us. Now, we can search for the MySQL credentials here. As you can see, they are going to be stored under MySQL settings. And we have the database name that is used to store the WordPress content, and that is called WordPress. That is fairly simple. And we have the MySQL credentials. In this case, you can see that the administrator of the server has provided root credentials, which is a security weakness and the password for the root user is a null password, which means we can actually authenticate to the MySQL server without providing a password. Again, another misconfiguration that we can take advantage of. In any case, however, if you do find a target that has WordPress installed, this file will reveal the MySQL credentials. And irrelevant or irregardless of whether the credentials will provide you with privileged access on the database server, you can still gain access and make changes to the WordPress database, as this user will have the necessary privileges to make changes to the WordPress database and consequently the various tables and entries. So what we can do with this information now is try and log into the MySQL server, and I'm just going to open up a new terminal here, and I'll just change my directory into my desktop. And to log in remotely to the target, we'll say MySQL. We then provide the user, which is in this case going to be the root user, and then we provide the null password, or we'll not provide any password for now. And then we specify the IP address of the target, which in this case is 10.10.10.11. In your case, it'll be different. And we hit enter. We're going to hit a null password here. And we should have access to the MySQL server. So again, give that a few seconds, and there you are. So we now have access to the MySQL server. And we can now begin dumping a list of databases on the server. And this, of course, can be done by typing in show databases. Like so, and you can see we have the WordPress database where we can actually get the WordPress credentials. So if we wanted to take over the WordPress website, we can actually get the admin credentials for the WordPress from the WordPress database, and we can also change it. So if we want to use that particular database, we can say use WordPress. And you can now see it's going to tell us database changed, and we're now working within the WordPress database. And then if we can say, for example, we can actually just say select from WordPress users, and this will display all the WordPress users. And if I just drag this screen here, you'll be able to see that defined clearly. So you can see that we have all the WordPress users and their password hashes right over here. So for example, the admin user password hashes here is provided here, as well as the email that we can use to log in. However, because the password is hashed, we will not be able to get the clear text password. Now, there are two ways or two techniques that we can actually utilize to get the clear text password. One of them is to crack the password hash. But given the fact that we have access to the database, we can actually update the password for the admin user. So, what we can do is if I just drag this back here, we can actually do that right now. So there we are. We'll now say update WordPress users. And we then want to set the user pass. And then we want to provide the hashing algorithm, which in this case is going to be MD5. So MD5. And then within there, we can provide our new password. So in this case, we can say, for example, we can change it to whatever we want. So, if I wanted to provide the password, let's see, password, let me just type that in correctly, password 123, and we can then close the brackets there. And then we say where the ID of the user is set to 1, and the ID for where the ID is set to 1, that's going to refer to the admin user, because as you can see, the admin user is always the first user. So we hit enter, and it's going to tell us query OK, row affected, rows matched and changed is 1. All right, so that means that was successful. And now that we've done that, we should be able to log into the WordPress admin panel, and I can actually take you through that right now. So I'm just going to open up the WordPress server in my browser, and I'll actually take you through that right now. All right, so I've opened up the target web server running on a port 8585, where we have the WordPress, the installation right over here, as well as a few other web applications that I mentioned, PHPMyAdmin being one. But if we open up WordPress here, we can see we have the WordPress website being hosted. Now we can log in using the credential that we just set, or the password that we just set for the admin user. So the username is going to be admin, and the password we set was password 123. And of course, that's just a test password, but you can see we're able to log into the WordPress admin dashboard, and that means we have total control over the WordPress site. We can download the website files, we can make changes, we can take over the website, so on and so forth. So we've been able to extend our domain of control over the target system and the company by taking over their website. And of course, as you can see, this is quite dangerous for the company, and this all came from a misconfigured configuration file, and the fact that the user credentials or the MySQL database credentials that were provided within the WordPress config file were actually for the root user, which means we pretty much got total access over the MySQL database server. That being said, that is how to take control over the WordPress server, and of course we've also taken a look at how to gain access to the MySQL database. And of course, you can go through the process of changing the password for the root user on the MySQL database server, and that should lock out any administrator from accessing it. Of course, that's not part of a penetration test. We're simply supposed to report our findings. That being said, let's also explore PHPMyAdmin and how we can gain access to PHPMyAdmin, right? So I'm just going to exit from the database there, or we'll actually leave that as is because I want to demonstrate a few things here. So what we're going to do is if we head back into our previous directory and under the WAMP directory, so I'll just take another step back. There we are. And we take a look at the apps directory or the apps folder. So apps, and we list that out. We can see we have PHPMyAdmin right over here. Right, so if we head over into the PHPMyAdmin folder, so we can actually just paste in the folder name because it has the version number appended to it. So we'll just hit enter. There we are, and we list out the contents of this particular directory. We can find the password within the config.inc.php file. So if we just look for it here, it should actually be stored. There we are. That's the file right over here. So the config.inc.php. So we can say type config.inc.php, and we can hit enter, and that should provide us with the credentials here. So again, if we list this out, let's see if we can access anything here. It looks like can we access anything there? We can see that we have the user root and the password, which again the MySQL database password that is used for PHPMyAdmin is the root user, and no password is provided, which means we can access the PHPMyAdmin control panel. If we open that up here, and you can see it's going to tell us that we don't have permission to access PHPMyAdmin on the server. So that means that the administrator of this particular server has added a security protection feature that will allow that actually has prevented any unauthorized access to the PHPMyAdmin installation. So again, we can also bypass this by modifying the WAMP configuration file, but of course that's beyond the scope of this particular book and this particular chapter. So let's move on to the next phase, which will involve dumping Windows hashes and of course cracking them and utilizing them to extend or to elevate our privileges on the target system. All right, so when it comes down to dumping, Windows hashes or NTLM hashes on a Windows target, there's plenty of ways you can go about doing it, and we've explored pretty much all the techniques that you can actually utilize within this particular chapter in the book. But we're going to be focusing on this particular target, and of course, one of the greatest or the best tools that you can use on the target is when you have a Meterpreter session, you can simply type in hash dump, and that'll dump all the password hashes for all the users on the system. And in this case, it does exactly that. So we're going to save these password hashes, but we are primarily interested in the administrator user. So let's copy that particular one. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to save this into a file on my desktop right over here. So desktop, and we are going to, again, I'm just going to save it into a file, and I'll just call it hash.txt, right? And we'll just paste in the password hash there, and we'll save that particular file. All right, so now that that is done, we'll get back to that hash when we'll be talking about cracking these hashes. But for now, let's take a look at a few other tools that we can use to dump password hashes. And one of them is the Windows Credentials Editor, also known as WCE. So WCE will list the logon sessions and their corresponding NTLM hashes, and this particular executable or binary comes pre-packaged with Kali Linux and any other penetration testing distribution. So what we can do, because we're using the meterpreter session, is if we list out our current directory and we go back into the root of this particular directory, we can navigate into the user directory, which is where we'll save this particular file. So users, and we'll then list out the files here, and we'll then specify the user that we currently have access to, which in this case is going to be Vagrant, because we're currently accessing this through the Vagrant account. And we can save this on the desktop. Now, of course, that is not recommended. I'm simply doing this to explain or demonstrate a few techniques. Alternatively, you should save your binaries or the files that you're using in a directory that is not frequently accessed by users on the system. So we can upload it directly using the meterpreter session here. So we can say upload, and the binary is stored in the user share directory under the Windows resources. And it is under WCE, and the binary we're going to be uploading is WCE 64-bit, because the target is a 64-bit system. And of course, you should have identified that information when performing local enumeration. So we're going to upload it, and there we are, it's uploaded correctly. So we now spawn a shell session here, and we execute the WCE 64-bit executable, which is WCE64.exe, and we hit enter. You can see this will also list out the NTLM hashes for the Vagrant user and the SSHD server, but it does not list out the administrator credentials, primarily because, as I said, the Windows credentials editor tool will actually get part of the NTLM hashes from memory for a user that has actually logged on to the system. So if the administrator does log on to the system and we run the Windows credentials editor tool again, or the utility again, we should be able to get the administrator credentials that way. So again, this is an alternative tool that really is quite silent and does not raise any alarms because it's essentially getting this information from memory. All right, now another tool or another module that you can use with Metasploit is the, let me just put this and I'll actually background my session. There we are. The module you want to use is the credential collector. Now you can search for it simply by typing in credential collector, like so. And that should bring it up. It is a post-exploitation Metasploit module. So we can paste that in. We want to use it, and we want to show the options for this particular module. And all we need to do is type or put in the session ID. So if we list out our sessions, you can see the only session that we have is session 1. So we can say set session to 1, and then we hit run. And that is going to, again, extract the password hashes, which in this case, it does give us all the user hashes on the system, the NTLM hashes, and we get the administrator NTLM hash, which is great. And then of course, it also gets the various tokens. And in this case, it wasn't able to get the NT authority. Well, it actually was able to get the NT authority system token, which means we can also perform an impersonation attack because we were able to get that particular token if we were to load up a tool like Incognito, as we explored in the previous video. Right. Another tool that we can use is Kiwi or Mimikatz, right? And this is a built-in module, meterpreter module. So if we go back into session 1 here, we can say load Kiwi, and we simply just hit enter, and that's going to load Mimikatz for us. And we can then say we can dump the contents of the SAM database, which we actually covered in the book, how to do manually, but this will simplify the process. So we can say LSA dump SAM, and we hit enter, and you can see it's going to tell us that we're not running a system or a privileged user. So that doesn't work at all, because again, if we did have a certain amount of privileges, we should have been able to dump out all their users and their corresponding NTLM hashes. All right, now that we've actually taken a look at how to do that, we can now move on to the process of actually cracking these hashes. Now, cracking Windows hashes will depend on a few things, as we covered in the book. The most important is the algorithm, or the actual type of hash. Are you dealing with an LM hash or an NTLM hash, right? And then the version of NTLM. We have NTLM version 1 and NTLM version 2, each of which is different from the last. Now, in the book, I've already explained the way the hashes are actually stored, And again, if we open up my desktop here, I'll just open up my desktop, and you can see we have the hash there. If I open this up in a graphical text editor, I'll actually explain that one more time. So firstly, you have the user, and then you have the unique RID, which is 500. And on Windows systems, the RID 500 is limited to administrators on the system. So if you are ever in a position where the user does not tell you or does not give you an idea as to what their function is on the system, always look for the RID. The RID will always tell you whether the user is an administrator or not. Now, in this particular case, this is an NTLM hash. So firstly, you have your LM hash, and then you have your NTLM hash right over here. So let's take a look at how to crack this particular password hash with John the Ripper. All right, so John the Ripper is an open source password security auditing and recovery utility that again supports a large number of hashes and ciphers. And in our case, we'll be utilizing John the Ripper to crack the Windows NTLM hashes that we were able to dump. But in our case, because we're only focused on elevating our privileges, we'll only be cracking the administrator password hash. So in order to use it, again, I'm simply just going to create a new terminal window here, and I'll head over to my desktop. There we go. And now that we are actually on our desktop, we can actually run the John command. All right, so we can say sudo John, right? And we then want to specify the format of the hash. In this case, it's an NT hash, which stands for NTLM. And then we specify the hash file, which in this case is just called hash.txt. And we hit enter. And then I'm going to paste in my password. And in our particular case, we can see that we have an issue with the format, which I think actually did not specify correctly. So there we are, format. And it looks like that particular password has been cracked. Now, in my particular case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to head over into my home directory. And if I can list out into the directory of my root user, because I've already cracked this password before. So, if we say sudo root, and of course, you don't need to do this if this is your first time. So sorry, su root. I'll paste in my root password there and head over into my home directory. And I want to get rid of the John directory here. All right, so sudo rm rf John. And once that is done, I'll just say sudo back to switch user back to Kali. And I'll head over into my desktop. So there we are, desktop. And we can run the previous command again. All right, so I'm going to hit enter, and there we are. We were able to crack the password almost immediately, and it used the word list user share John password.list, and the password for the administrator is vagrant, as it actually says over here. So the password for the administrator is vagrant, similar to the vagrant user. So the administrator of this system hasn't really configured his system for security, and it's something that we were able to exploit. All right, now in the event that you aren't able to crack the NTLM hash, the next question might be, well, how do I still elevate my privileges if I still have the hash? And that's a very good question. The way we can do that is by leveraging or utilizing a technique known as pass the hash. Now, pass the hash involves authenticating with the target using the dumped hash. In our case, we can use the administrator hash, and this attack can be automated by using a Metasploit module that leverages the ps-exec command line utility on Windows. All right, so in order to use this, I'm just going to background my session on Meterpreter again, and we are now going to say use. We can actually search for it, but in my case, I'm just going to type it in because I know it by head. So use Windows SMB, and then we're going to say ps-exec. We hit enter, and that should actually load the module for us. And I'm just going to close up this terminal now, and we want to set the payload. To Windows x64 because we're dealing with a 64-bit target, Meterpreter, and we're then going to say reverse TCP, right? And we hit enter. If we show the options for this particular module, there are a few things that we need to set. One of them, of course, is going to be the target host or the host IP, which is going to be the rhost option. We then need to provide the SMB user and the SMB password. So the first thing we're going to say is set our hosts, and we're going to set the target IP, which in my case is 10, 10, 10, 11. In your case, it'll be different. We then want to set the SMB password. So set SMB pass. I'm just going to type that in correctly. There we are, SMB pass. And then we're going to open up the actual file that contains the hash. And we're just going to provide the, we actually want to provide, yeah, that's the SMB pass there. So we want to provide the hash only instead of providing the RID and the username. So just make sure you only copy the hash there. And once that is done, we're just going to paste that in there. And then we're going to set the SMB user, and we're going to set that to administrator, like so. And we hit enter. And once we're ready to go, all we need to do is hit run. So I'm just going to clear up my terminal here. And I'm just going to hit run, and that is going to authenticate us with the admin user. So again, it should provide us with an elevated Meterpreter session. So there we are. We get an elevated Meterpreter session as the user administrator because we were able to utilize the ps-exec utility and utilize the NTLM hash for, NTLM authentication. So once that is done, we can actually, say get user ID. And you can see we have NT authority system and we have admin privileges on the target system. Now, in the event you were able to crack the administrator password, you can also authenticate, through other services. For example, RDP. So if the target has RDP running, which RDP stands for the Remote Desktop Protocol, which allows remote control or remote access over a system. If that is enabled by the administrator of the target system, we can actually utilize it to get a graphical user interface or to get a, to actually get a GUI access on the target using a tool called Remina, which is an RDP client that is available on Kali Linux. So again, we can do this by, searching for it. So Remina, there we are. I'm just going to open that up and I'll paste in the password there. And we can see the protocol is RDP. We now need to provide the target IP, which in this case is going to be 10, 10, 10, 11. We then want to hit enter, and it's going to ask us for the username, which in this case will provide as administrator. And of course, we were able to crack the password and we know it is Vagrant. So we're going to hit, we're just going to hit OK now, and that should actually connect and authenticate us. There we are. You can see we're able to log into the target and get an actual graphical user interface. And we are able now to remotely control and access the system as an administrator would, or any other regular system would. So of course, this is very useful if you want to have an idea of how the system is configured, or it's just a better way of getting access, especially when a system is remote. So you can actually see that we're logged in as the administrator user. There we are, and we can perform administrative tasks, so on and so forth. So again, this is not recommended to run. Of course, it's just a proof of concept that demonstrates what you can do with the credentials that you've been able to gather and that you've been able to crack. So again, this is not recommended, especially when users are active on the system, as they may recognize it as an anomaly. So you want to make sure that you use that only and if necessary. That being said, that's pretty much all that I wanted to cover in this video. As I said, we've explained quite a few techniques within the book that you can actually try yourself. I've primarily covered the most important aspects of password mining on a Windows system, and I've done so, based on the configuration of the Metasploitable 3 virtual machine. So again, just to confirm, we can list out our sessions here, and you can see we have an unprivileged session, which we started off with, and we then have an elevated session on the target using Meterpreter, and we now have administrative access on the target. So that is going to be it for this video, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.